Alright, what's up? So I haven't done an update on this thing in a little while, and you guys might be a little bit curious what's going on with the 351 S5. So, due to inflation, I had to kind of hit pause on the project for a little bit. I spent more money than I had, so hopefully I can start getting back on this thing, but we did a little bit of upgrades. So, I started out with last year, the rack and pinion went out. I had a Ford Mustang rack and pinion flipped upside down to make this thing right-hand drive. The car did not like that. So now I've got one of the rebuilt K-Fab right-hand drive rack and pinions. Back to a normal car house member. PBM mounts. Got it looking good down there. I did solid mount the motor this year. Another issue I had was my distributor gear exploded. I had a knockoff cam position sensor and it seized up. I lost oil pressure. Engine was fine. I ran 2 more drift events after that. I probably ran the car with like 30 minutes without oil pressure, but I did not want to drive this year on that same motor. So I did a couple things. First thing, I tore the whole motor apart, and yep, there's a lot of metal inside it. No major damage aside from bearing wear, but I decided to do a couple upgrades. So yep, we rebuilt the whole motor. It is now 408. It's got about 12.5 to 1 compression ratio on this thing. And also I upgraded the oil pump. So hopefully I won't have to worry about distributor gears breaking anymore. So I got the Avaid DrySump oil system. They were super helpful. I told them exactly what I was doing, what kind of engine I had, and they sent me everything I needed. But it got a little bit complicated. I did originally have this motor sitting about 2 to 3 inches over on this side with the front sump pan. I had the exhaust coming up and forward and down, and it was all going over there. And that was mainly for steering shaft clearance. I just used some turbo manifolds and flipped them forward. Now for this one with the new DrySump, I couldn't really lower the engine anymore with the front sump pan. I don't know how well you guys can see in that. And that mainly came down to all the lines and fittings that kind of came off the pan. I did modify the forward mount a little bit to clear for the rack and pinion to clear the oil fitting, but I was able to move the engine probably 3 inches further back with the DrySump. So didn't get it any lower, but I got a lot more farther back. Another thing we're going to try is a mechanical fan. A lot of people go rear mount radiators. I've seen some pros, I've seen some cons to it. So I'm hoping to keep this more simple. So I did a whole front serpentine conversion. A lot of this is Jones Racing products. Mechanical fan is going to pull way more CFM than electric fan did. The electric fans did okay, but I knew it wasn't going to be enough on like a 100-degree hot day. Trying to do more than like 1 or 2 laps. So we're going to do a Mishimoto front mount radiator. This is actually for a Fox Mustang. It's for LS swaps. It's going to work out great. This is a dual pass, the race radiator. So coolant comes in here, drops down, comes back over. I had to do a lot of fabricating to make this work that I didn't plan on doing. It just ended up happening so I had to move this fan. Even with the engine further as far back as the DrySump allowed, this fan was still too far forward, as far back as I could possibly get it. So with my DrySump bracket, this typically sits on the front side of this plate here. As you can see, I had to notch it out for clearance there. I made custom bushings, and I moved this DrySump back. It was sitting over here, so 1/4 of an inch. But as you can see, that DrySump belt, it's really close, so you can fit almost your finger in there. And then I'm probably going to trim down the trailing edge of this fan blade right where that bolt is a little bit, so if we get any fan flex, we're not going to have any interference to fit. Additionally, with this Jones Racing belts, I didn't want a belt slippage, so I used a KRC idler pump pulley, or idler pulley with this as well. I wanted to keep a lot of tension on this belt. The only thing this belt is going to be driving is my alternator. I did have a KRC power steering pump. I am switching to the Volvo electric pump, mainly because off throttle transitions, the steering would get a little heavy, not too bad. But I'm going to try the Volvo electric power steering pump, see how that treats me. So I couldn't find a left-hand mount alternator bracket. I didn't think this DrySump pump would fit over here on the left side. I was really nervous on clearance. You can see it's pretty tight with that alternator, so it probably would have fit in fine. If I ordered the left-hand mount, this would have saved me a ton of headaches. But I went with the right-hand DrySump pump, so I moved the alternator over here instead. So as you can see, I did a whole bunch of custom fabrication. Fabricated an aluminum bracket up here and a steel plate here to put a bolt all the way through the alternator. That was not enough. This thing would still, when you squeeze the belt, the whole alternator would flex towards the front of the engine. So I did some additional bracing and just created this crazy looking plate with this custom adjustable rod end. And now you can squeeze on this hard as you can. You see that alternator isn't going anywhere. GM one side wire alternator, all custom bushings. I was really hoping just to buy a bolt-on kit and have this all bolt-on, but again, I needed this fan to sit as far back as possible. So I just got the pulleys and everything else I could to go as far back as possible. So I see you got the Jones Racing main drive pulley. I had to do a new crank trigger. So there is my new crank trigger mount. I just made a plate that bolts onto this KRC power steering pump. Or sorry, KRC idler bracket. This was my original timing cover. This is where I did have the crank sensor on there originally with the electric water pump inlets. And that was my timing mark. Now, I don't know if you'll be able to see it. I just got a little copper piece down there that hangs above my new ATI damper. So, I made some new headers. These are 4 into 2 into 1 headers. They're currently being tigged out of stainless steel. So I've gotten about that far so far. As you can see, I still got a lot of welding left to do on these things. So that's pretty much where we're at with the small block Ford swap. I'm super stoked to drive this thing, and hopefully I can fire this thing up for too long. I just got to finish making all my DrySump oil lines, make an oil tank, finish welding the exhaust, and then I can fire it up. At that point, I can hook it all up, fire it up, do the finished break-in runs on the engine. Hopefully that goes well, and really excited to see how this thing does and how much power it makes.